Today on the Humanistic Resources Show, we're going to be talking about the business side of workplace wellness. You're not going to want to miss this. Welcome to today's episode of the Humanistic Resources Show. I'm Denise O'Malley, the host of it and the founder of You Define Wellness. I want to first start off by saying thank you to, if you've been watching us for the past couple of weeks, you know this is our brand new show. We debuted it, this is our third episode, so we debuted it a couple weeks ago. And your comments have been phenomenal. I love the discussion that's going on. You're telling other people about it. I appreciate your support immensely, and I just needed to start off today with thanking you. So today we're going to talk about the business side of investing in workplace wellness programs. Now, there's statistics out there. We may talk about some of those today, who knows. But a lot of businesses really just don't understand it, and some of them see it as an additional burden to put on the workplace. So I'm bringing an expert to the table. I'm going to go ahead and bring him up. I have been hearing for a year now that I needed to meet Patrick Louie of LivingWell Solutions. And we never really crossed paths. We never had a solid introduction. We finally did, I don't know what, a month or two ago, something like that, Patrick. And I got to tell you guys, that conversation just blew my mind. This was a guy who got it. And not only that, if you know me, you know I'm a reformed insurance agent. I've been in the world of employee benefits for a long, long time. And I love it when I meet somebody who has a similar background to mine and gets it. So I had to bring him on the show. So Patrick, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Denise. I'm excited to be here.
Let's chat for a couple minutes. I know you have a presentation for us, but as I said, you're an insurance agent. You're up in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that really fascinates me because I've loved seeing the changes that have been taking place in the world of insurance in Canada for the past couple of decades. Mm-hmm. But you work with employers all the time about their employee benefit programs, but you do something a little bit different. You bring in a conversation about wellness. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've all seen in the news the rising rates of chronic illness, chronic disease. Most likely, we all know someone who's struggled with some sort of chronic disease or life-changing illness like cancer or Alzheimer's. But yet, from what I've seen all these years, is a system that's actually designed more to reinforce the sickness than actually operate towards working on true healthcare. So I knew that I had to do something about it. So instead of taking the same standard approach and looking on the medical side of things, I discovered that there's a whole nother world out there, a world of holistic wellness, holistic well-being. And these are viable solutions that can actually address this rising tide of illness and actually reverse it. So I'm excited to share that with people.
So how receptive are the employers when you're talking with them about this?
Some of them are at first they're a little bit skeptical about alternatives to our standard healthcare model. But after talking with them, discussing some of the numbers, some of the results that patients and companies have been able to achieve, they actually become a lot more excited, a lot more receptive, and that really kind of starts the conversation, sparks the conversation around wellness.
Yeah, and you're not talking to them about replacing their medical insurance and doing away with it. You're talking about integrating it in.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I see it as a best of both worlds approach. I mean, we still do need the medical side of things.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to, get in a car accident or something like that, I would still rely on, doctors and surgeons and hospitals to cover my emergency needs. Yeah. But we also need to look at the chronic side of things, which I believe the holistic side is better equipped for.
Yeah, yeah. I had a conversation with an insurance agent, employee benefits insurance agent, who actually lived across the street from me, and this was 20 years ago, I think. Probably we had this conversation, and I told him one day, I said, you know, I know the solution on how to make $1 million, and he's like, okay, tell me. And he's like, come up with a plan for wellness and focus on that. And he poo-pooed the idea. He was like, oh, no, 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 people just need medical insurance. That's all that it's necessary out there. And it's not. I mean, there are so many different paths to healthy living. And, you know, even as simple as good nutrition can do some wonderful things to change your medical condition, that, and
Absolutely.
they don't know where to turn, and they don't know where to start. And if their doctor isn't recommending it, we're seeing more and more doctors who are getting more into functional medicine. But if their doctor isn't recommending it, you know, I had, I'll share a real short story. My father has a form of cancer, and I was at one of his early appointments with this cancer doctor, and I asked her, you know, what effect would nutrition have on my dad? Because quite frankly, okay, my parents are the hamburger helper generation, okay? And so they don't eat all that well. And it doesn't matter how long I preach to them. It's, you know, I'm not going to change them. They're in their 80s and they're set in their ways. But I wanted the doctor to reinforce what I've been trying to say to them of eating healthy, changing what you're eating, eliminating sugar, eliminating processed foods, things like that. And this oncologist actually looked at me and she says, well, I don't really know that there's any studies that would show that eating healthy would help improve the situation. Blew my mind. So it's up to us.
Yeah,
it's up to us to help get that message out there. So with that being said, Patrick, I'm going to give the stage over to you. You've got a wonderful presentation for us, and then we'll be back for questions and answers. If you're watching this live with us, if you have questions as we go along, please put your questions in the chat box and we will get them answered during the presentation. With that being said, Patrick, the stage is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. All right. So as Denise mentioned, my name is Patrick. I'm the co-founder of LivingWell Solutions. And today we'll be sharing the 3 biggest mistakes that HR professionals and small business owners make with their employee healthcare strategy. Now, before we get started, I just want to let all the viewers know that the information presented in this talk is not intended as medical advice. So please do not use any of this as a substitute for any medical care or treatments advised by licensed professionals. But I have an important question to ask all of you. Are we facing a healthcare crisis? Because today in the US, 6 in 10 adults live with chronic disease. 4 in 10 have 2 or more. In Canada, 2 in 5 Canadian adults are struggling with chronic disease. And if you think that's bad, in the US, 1 in 3 women or 1 in 2 men will face cancer in their lifetime. In Canada, this is 1 in 2. In your golden years, might not be so golden, because 7 in 10 North Americans in their retirement years will lose their independence and require extended nursing care. And all of this is coming from credible sources like the CDC, the American Cancer Society, and the Public Health Agency of Canada, which is linked to the government. Which leads us to our first mistake, which is assuming if your employees are at work, they are perfectly healthy, also known as not having a healthcare strategy at all for your company. So we have a crisis in workplaces today, whether you realize it or not. Because almost 1 in 2 US employees, or 7 in 10 in Canada, struggle with their mental health at work. Now, workers keep quiet about it because there's a real fear of losing your job, being passed over on promotions and advancements, and being seen as weak or not enough. So workers, they go into the office, they put on a brave face, but they struggle in silence. More than 7 in 10 US employees, or 1 in 3 in Canada, are being forced to juggle their career and caregiving for a family member, and many of them are facing burnout at record levels. More than 7 in 10 US employees, or 1 in 5 in Canada, have admitted that they're so distracted by their personal financial situation that they're distracted at work and they just can't do it properly. And in Canada, nearly 1 in 2 employees have reported that their chronic health condition has gotten so bad that it's impacted their productivity and their attendance at the workplace. And what all this adds up to really is a hidden crisis in workplaces that's costing US companies $794 billion or $122 billion in Canada every single year in lost productivity. And this is not a one-time thing. This happens every single year. So you might be wondering, is there anything you can do about it? Well, you can't fix what you can't see, and you can't manage what you don't measure. So one suggestion I can make is to perform a gap analysis using an employee holistic health assessment to see where the gaps are in your specific organization. And the first tip I can give you on that is to measure all aspects of health. So not just obvious ones like physical health or mental health, but also look at things like financial health, spiritual health, personal growth, and work-life issues like, how many of your staff are caregiving for a family member and how many hours a week do they do that? Or are they struggling with legal issues like divorce or buying a new home? Number 2, focus on objective rather than confidence-based questions, because people are notoriously overconfident when it comes to estimating their situation. So instead of asking a question, let's say, how would you rate your immune system health? From not very confident to somewhat confident to very confident. Ask something numerical, like in the past 12 months, how many times have you had a cold or the flu or allergies, and how long did it last in days or weeks? And number 3, use this assessment as an opportunity to create engagement with your staff. So maybe with your assessment, you can have it generate a well-being score that employees can work on trying to improve. And that leads us to the second mistake, which is thinking the healthcare system and your benefits plan are all that's needed to keep your employees healthy. But you might be wondering, doesn't the healthcare system keep us healthy? Isn't that what it's designed to do? Well, I'll refer you back to the stats I shared in the beginning, but I believe these numbers speak for themselves. You might also be wondering, well, what about our employee benefits plan? Doesn't that bridge those gaps and provide that extra support? Well, as it turns out, even where companies offer employee benefits, almost 7 in 10 US employees still struggle to get the healthcare that they need. And in Canada, nearly 9 in 10 employees with a benefits plan actually report they still need more support for their chronic health condition. So to me, employee benefits are not getting the job done. And that's because the healthcare system and the typical approach to employee benefits, they both have 3 fundamental limitations. The first being that this system is more geared towards looking at symptoms rather than root causes. So I'll give a couple examples. So let's have a look at the typical approach to healthcare. So let's say you've had a bad headache for a while. You might reach for a pain reliever. If you're struggling with your mental health, your doctor might prescribe you antidepressants. If you have type 2 diabetes, you might be on some sort of blood sugar medication like metformin or Ozempic. But the problem with relying on medications is that your underlying health condition actually never improves, and you're relying on that medication for the rest of your life. And the problem with that is that masking these symptoms can lead to more serious health problems down the road. Your condition can get worse, and you can develop even new health conditions. And finally, medications have side effects. So often people start taking medications for the medications, and this perpetuates a vicious cycle. The second major limitation is that our healthcare model tends to focus on specialists and putting our healthcare needs into silos versus taking a more holistic approach to it. For example, in your healthcare journey, you might have consulted with a cardiologist, neurologist, maybe a gastroenterologist. But my question to you is, do they talk to each other? Do they share your info for an overall whole body treatment plan? My guess is no, because this model doesn't often consider how treatments for one part of the body affects other parts, and it doesn't consider different interconnections, like stress, your gut health, your immune system, sleep patterns, your genetics, even your environment at work. All these factors and more, they interact with each other, and they definitely interact with your health. But the system ignores all of that. And number three, this model usually takes a more reactive versus proactive approach to healthcare. Let me ask you, how many of you have gone to a doctor saying, you haven't been feeling that great, but the doctor comes back and says, well, I don't see anything wrong with you, so maybe come back in a couple of months or 6 months, and if it gets worse, we'll deal with it then. The problem with that is that you're still suffering for all that time. And in the meanwhile, you're basically waiting for disease to happen instead of looking for ways to prevent it. So let's say your condition has gotten worse, and now you have new conditions. You might develop other health issues. You may know them as comorbidities. And so with a more severe condition and new conditions, this becomes a lot more expensive to treat you as a patient. And finally, in the US, there's a system called relative value units. And this system is used to standardize the way that doctors and other healthcare providers get paid. But the problem with this is that the value of a consultation, especially a lengthy consultation that's needed for patients who have more serious, more complex, more chronic health conditions, is relatively low compared to things like imaging tests, procedures, and surgeries. So what do doctors do? Well, they prescribe more imaging tests, more procedures, and more surgeries, because that's what's going to make them the money instead of actually spending the time to help a patient. And what this does is it incentivizes finding new problems, but not actually finding ways to keep patients healthy. And what this all boils down to is a system that's designed for acute care, not chronic conditions. And by acute care, I mean short-term solutions for medical emergencies. But if you look at the numbers, in terms of national healthcare spending, in the US, 90% of all healthcare dollars goes towards chronic and mental health conditions, and that's 67% in Canada. But to me, that's a huge disconnect, because the majority of healthcare dollars are being spent for the wrong strategy. You're trying to apply short-term solutions for a long-term problem. And to me, it clearly isn't working. So in reality, we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. And you might have heard that term being used before. So what are your options at this point if the system is broken? Well, one suggestion I can make is to start developing your own holistic health support system. So start curating a network of health, well-being, and work-life support experts who are focused on true healthcare and not sick care. Or get an expert to help you with this. So in terms of maximizing your employee supports, the first tip is educational workshops. Make sure they offer those, because you don't know what you don't know. But with these workshops, properly structured, an employee, instead of waiting for illness, they can actually become empowered and invested in their own health. Number two, make sure the providers that are in your network, they are focused on addressing the root causes of illness and taking a whole body approach instead of just focusing on the symptoms. And finally, don't just look at the newest cutting edge technologies, but also look at ancient treatments as well, such as acupuncture or Ayurveda, because you can have two employees who have the exact same health condition respond differently. One of them, for example, might respond to let's say a personalized supplement regime based on the latest DNA testing, whereas the other employee might do better with acupuncture and ancient herbal remedies. It really depends. And that leads us to our third mistake, which is applying the same one-size-fits-all strategy to all your staff. Does your organization have a diverse workforce? And if so, how do you support their diverse needs? Because let's say your organization offers a strong health and dental plan, life insurance for all the employees, and a 401k with matching or RSPs here in Canada. But let's look at Kayla. Now, Kayla just graduated from post-secondary. So she's single, so she doesn't need the life insurance, for one. Number two, since she just graduated, she's a long way off from retirement, so she's not even thinking about that. What Kayla is most concerned about are her crushing student loans, for one, her high cost of rent, even though she lives in a modest, small studio apartment. And hopefully, if she has any money left over at the end of the month, she can use that towards yoga for de-stressing and to refocus her life. So look at Amir. Amir and his partner can't have children, so they're looking at ways to afford adoption or surrogacy. Now, the life insurance will be important for Amir and his partner, but that's not their biggest focus. And they're also interested, because they're going to bring a child into the world or adopt one, that they want to look at supporting an eco-friendly lifestyle to protect the environment. And finally, we have Evelyn, who's been struggling as both a full-time career woman and a caregiver for her mom, who has early onset Alzheimer's. Now, because of her mom's diagnosis, Evelyn, of course, understandably is concerned about her own risk of dementia, and she's wondering if there's any testing she can do for that. But in the meanwhile, she's investing in high-quality supplements to support her long-term health. Now, imagine if you had 100 employees, 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees. How would you go about supporting all their needs? Do you offer the same standard benefits to everyone and hope that's enough? Or do you keep adding new benefits to meet every individual need, which can get very expensive very quickly? Is there another option? Well, one thing you can look in developing is some sort of flexible funding arrangement. So in the US, maybe setting up some sort of wellness account to help, so that employees can have a self-directed support program. Or in Canada, we can actually design insurance plans to allow that flexibility so for employees to basically customize it themselves. So when structuring your funding arrangement, you can use your survey data to decide between core benefits and flexible benefits. So core benefits are the ones that you see as too important, too universal to let employees decide on their own, or it might be ones that the majority of staff members are kind of leaning towards, and it would just be more cost effective to leverage group buying power for that. Tip number two is give everyone the same level of benefits, but not the same benefits. And the example I'll give is maybe you have a small handful of employees who are interested in taking yoga classes. Well, it wouldn't make any sense to hire a yoga facilitator for your entire company for just a small handful. But at the same time, you can't just give a few employees those yoga benefits, because the other employees will claim that there's favoritism or even worse, discrimination. So instead, you can fund this wellness wallet or wellness account with the same dollar amount, and then let the employees choose what they think are the best benefits for them. And that way, you give that personalized support, but at the same time, you have much greater control over your budget. And the third tip is you can apply matching or standalone categories to reinforce your corporate culture. For example, you might offer, say, $500 a year as a standalone benefit for employees to take courses or workshops. Or you might apply one-to-one matching. So match dollar for dollar that every employee uses for green living expenses like transit passes or things like that. And that takes us to our last part, which is you might be wondering, if I were to invest in holistic wellness, this sounds great and everything, but what can I expect as returns? Well, in terms of the average return on wellness programs have resulted in 1.8 fewer absentee days per employee per year, 11% higher revenue per employee, and 28% higher shareholder returns. But the biggest benefit I've seen is that for every dollar invested in wellness, there's a $5.81 benefit to a company. So actually, wellness can be very profitable. So my final thoughts. First of all, avoid a checklist mentality. Don't just create a surface level wellness program just to say you've done it and tick off a few boxes, because that won't go anywhere. Think engagement when you're designing your program. look at developing employee focus groups, wellness champions, and create games or contests around wellness. And finally, remember that true change starts at the top. So if your senior leadership team doesn't truly and authentically embrace wellness, everyone else will see right through that and it won't go anywhere. So if any of this has resonated with you today, I invite you to build a brighter future together. Thank you very much.
Wow. I can't wait. I've got a bunch of questions to ask you, but we've got to pay for this show first. So let's everybody stay tuned for a message from our sponsor. All right, we're back. You had some great information in your presentation, Patrick. I loved it, and I was doing all kinds of comments over in the chat over here is on reinforcing some of those. I happened to be at an event this morning that is about workplace wellness, and there were some wonderful speakers that I listened to. That one in particular was the head of employee benefits for a fairly large school district. They have about 14,000 covered lives in their benefit plans right now. And one of the things that she talked about is choice and diversity and options. And you covered it a little bit in having the different choices. I love that illustration of the three different people and how they all have different needs. But can you expand on that a little bit more? How do you work in getting choice and diversity in a complex plan by yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, in Canada, we are able to leverage flex plans or flexible arrangements where essentially it's more like a wellness wallet, and employees actually have that choice to allocate where they think is most important in any given year.
Now, but they're having, and I, in the United States, we have the health savings accounts and the flexible spending accounts, and those are great, except for they're not really for wellness. And so there's no tax benefits for it. There are now lifestyle savings accounts that have come on the market that are after tax benefits. That's basically a lump sum of change that employer funds, and you can go spend it on what you want. But you're talking to a lot of people in the wellness, and as that commercial indicated, there's 76% of the employees. There's a huge significant percentage, actually. Let's go to the 61% that are the don'ts, that don't know where to get started. So with the expertise that you're bringing in, how do you talk to an employer who says, may have employees that just don't know where to get started and they're feeling overwhelmed, and it's not enough to just say, here's some money, go spend it on wellness activities?
Yeah, that's where I see educational workshops as being the first key component of this. You bring in a wellness facilitator who's not just there to talk about the say the science of nutrition and the benefits of that, but is also there to share their own story, because quite often a lot of these wellness providers they have faced chronic disease before, so they often start off struggling with the exact same conditions that employees do, and they have found ways to work through that. So in sharing their story, employees can relate to that, and they can see light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that that's very empowering for employees to see and to be able to get started.
Yeah. Because, hey, I can, because this is my show. I want to plug something for those who are watching this, that if you're looking for those resources of the speakers to bring in for the wellness education, or the topics, or the vetted experts and stuff, do go to our sponsors' website, and there's two places to look. One is under Humanistic Resources Show. This show, that's where you're going to find our prior episodes, but also some quick links to some resources for speakers and other business resources. But also in the Wellness Center, you'll find all kinds of recorded videos that you can promote to your employees, and all kinds of other resources and services. And, one of the things that I'm very, very proud of is there is a very large organization that utilizes the recordings that we've done out there as education for their employees, and shares them in their employees' wellness newsletters that go out to their staff. So there's some really good content out there. So I had to plug that. Sorry, Patrick, but a little deviation there. Hey, this show is about resources, right?
That's right.
I might as well tell people the resources that we've built. Also on this event that I was at today, one question came up about using wellness as rewards. Have you ever run into that with employers, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, are you referring to sort of what I talked about, gamification, or creating games or contests around wellness?
Yeah. Well, that's a component of it, certainly. But rewards could also be for everybody who fills in this survey. You're going to get, X number of dollars towards your wellness account, or whatever it may be. But gamification is something I'm really intrigued with. And so I'd love to hear more on that too, of what you have to say.
Yeah, it's relatively new. So different strategies are being developed all the time about it. But I guess I'll just address one of the pitfalls is make sure that the reward is in alignment with your wellness strategy. So when your reward can't just be cash to however you want to spend it, or don't make it a gift card to Dunkin' Donuts or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really bad idea. Yeah, you want to make sure that it is definitely in alignment with that. Let's talk about getting the top level down buy-in to wellness programs. How important is that?
It's absolutely critical. It's critical. I've seen so many different companies where, in the commercials, these are very large corporations, businesses here in Canada, and you see other commercials, and they all talk about, their respect for the environment, or their dedication towards mental health. But I've seen internally that they just don't walk the talk. And no matter what they do in terms of their initiatives, you don't get buy-in, because employees, they do see through that.
Yeah. And I think it's not just from the top. It's from the top definitely dictates it. I was working with a HVAC company, and the people who were sabotaging it were the job supervisors, and because they were telling their employees, don't go to that wellness program. We've got a backlog of people that we need to meet with. We need to get out there and get those jobs done, because that's how they got paid. That's where they got their bonuses, was how many jobs they got accomplished. And we had to have a conversation with those frontline supervisors to say, look, here's the deal. If your people aren't taking care of themselves, you're not going to have them to go out to those jobs. And so they softened up a little bit more, but it's literally levels. Management has to get engaged, and not, when I say get engaged, I mean they need to be walking the walk, talking the talk, and doing it themselves, and sharing what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about employee resource groups? Have you worked with any or formed any in the past?
Sorry, what do you mean by employee resource
So
groups?
this is something I'm starting to hear an awful lot about. They've been around for years. I was involved in a company that I worked at. I was on the wellness committee, and we put together a softball team and everything. But we're starting to see more and more of these employee resource groups where they're saying we need a support group at work for DEI or for wellness or for LGBTQ or a support group for employees who are also caring for an aging parent, so that they can come together as a community within a community and, and get the resource. And a couple of things happen. First of all, they are able to communicate to management what it is that this unique group needs and how the employer can support them and offer suggestions. But then they're also there for each other. Are you not seeing those up in Canada?
Okay, yeah, I just wasn't sure of the term. Yeah, we in Canada we call them employee focus groups.
Okay,
that's one aspect of it, but the other aspect is peer-to-peer support groups, and we're seeing that increasing for especially for mental health. Being able to have sort of that semi-anonymous, but also knowing that there's someone there who's actually sharing the same journey with you. That's we're seeing that growing in Canada too.
How are you? I'm bouncing all over the place here. That's just because that's questions come to my mind. How are you supporting mental health in the workplace?
Yeah, well, I mean, we are bringing in educators and experts who have what we call lived experience. So the worst thing that you can do is bring in someone who doesn't have that experience. They may have the educational background, they might have several degrees on it, but they haven't walked, that metaphorical mile in someone's shoes, and so they can't fully relate to how someone struggles unless they've had them themselves. So I think bringing mental health facilitators with that lived experience should be a critical component of any mental health initiative.
Yeah. Bouncing around again here. Sorry. When you're meeting with an employer, I love having the conversation about return on investment, and you and I may have had it in our previous get together that we've had. I can't recall actually if we have or not, but I have some definite views on it. I loved how you were talking about the measurements to put in place, reduction of absentee days, whatever it may be that are looking at it. When you're talking with an employer, how are you setting what the ROI is going to be?
Well, I mean, I'm definitely sharing those same stats that I shared during the presentation. But quite often, at least with the employers that I've worked with so far, we can see actually savings even in their current insurance plan, just by restructuring it to go from a one size fits all to a more flexible, customizable package. We're seeing reductions in insurance premiums right off the bat. So that's one thing that actually gets them excited to look further.
So I'm not familiar with the Canadian marketplace. So are these self-funded plans that you're working with?
So I mean, they're not self-funded, and it's just the employer creating their own program, but it's essentially the employer has a defined contribution to these plans, and so it's more of a defined contribution plan, and then the insurance company will manage it on behalf of the company.
That makes a little bit more sense, because in the United States, I think most of the plans that are actually sold are hey, anybody, it's the plain vanilla plans, as I call them. It's any insurance agent can sell any one of those plans. They're not customized for the employer. And in that particular case, there's a challenge, because an employer putting a wellness program in place, it will not result in a reduction of the premiums, because it's a pooled plan with all these other employers that are out there.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing that direct correlation. So sometimes it's a hard sell. But I know one thing: there is only one way to reduce insurance premiums.
Hmm.
One,
Yeah.
and that's reduce the medical claim costs.
That's right.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same here in Canada. We have prescription drug expenses as being one of the biggest drivers of increasing plan costs. When you look at premiums year after year, it's those drug costs.
Is
Especially we're seeing more complex conditions now, and we're seeing
yeah.
more specialty drugs being introduced into the marketplace. But all that does is add more to the cost.
And is that because Canada, the people here in the United States are getting their prescriptions out of Canada because they're less expensive? So is it just because the plans are covering more up there?
Yes, sometimes it's a matter of plans. So sorry, sometimes it's the plans costing more. Sometimes it's just medical inflation. It's just the cost of everything is going up, so the cost of drugs are going up as well.
Yeah, we feel that pain down here. What do you want to add that we haven't talked about yet? Because as you were thinking about today and what we're going to be covering, what have I not asked you about that you wanted to cover?
Not quite sure. I think we've covered quite a bit
Yeah.
today. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing is, I mean, I guess I'm curious what you've seen in terms of reaction attitudes towards holistic wellness in the U.S. You know, what do employers and employees like think about some of the more
Out there
oh
therapies?
yeah, alternative. I don't hesitate to say alternative, but
Well, you know, I like to think of them as integrative because they do fit in with other things. I see a lot
mhm,
of eye rolling, in all
mhm,
honesty. The eye rolling comes from the person writing the check,
right.
is what I see. The embracing of it comes from typically the human resources director who does these things. It's typically a female and does these things herself. And so it's getting that check writer
Mhm,
over the bridge. And we have some things, we have over 130 modalities in the Udefined Wellness Network. And I say over because, quite frankly, I lost count a long time
mhm,
ago. And we have everything from, we cover all 8 dimensions of well-being. So we're going to have we have an environmental person who focuses on meth toxicity in the workplace. We have somebody in spirituality, some buddies. I have a lot of people in all these different areas. We go beyond the traditional financial, emotional, and physical. And we even life coaches and occupational coaches as well.
mhm,
And so, we have this diversity. And so I even have a few psychics in my network. I really
mhm,
do. And that's the part where an employer typically will roll their eyes and say, are you kidding? Here's my philosophy. If whatever it is that your employee does for in the name of wellness reduces their stress level and makes them a better employee, is that not also wellness?
mhm,
And with complete confidentiality, the employer will never know what the employees are doing
yeah,
because I can't tell them, and nor would I ever want to tell them. It's none of their business.
yeah,
On our assessment, when we complete it, we have a very comprehensive assessment. I love what you were talking about, and we have one that covers all 8 dimensions of well-being.
mhm,
We're going to go into things like suicide. We're going to go into things like alcohol and drug use. We're going to
yeah,
ask if you are behind in your mortgage payments. In addition to the health questions, we're going to ask if you have a support network. And some of that information, when it's in the hands of a qualified, trained professional within our network, if somebody says that they've been suicidal in the last 30 days, that takes the conversation a whole different direction.
yeah,
But if somebody is talking about heavy drug use and alcohol use, and we do the assessments and we find there's a significant percentage of employees that are falling into these categories that we think needs immediate attention, we will be having a conversation with the employer, depending upon the size of the company, about some programs to bring in. In a 10-person group and an employee is talking about heavy drug and alcohol use, illegal drug use and alcohol use, we can't have that conversation with the employer because they can figure out who the employee is, and I don't want to get sued.
Yeah.
So, we walk a very fine line on some of those things that that we're asking the employer. But when we're talking to them and we're stressing upon them the importance of having that assessment done by a third party, which gives more trust to the employee that the information won't get out to other employees. And we get higher participation too, because employers typically get about a 30% response rate on assessments and surveys if they haven't rewarded the employee for taking it.
Yeah.
So that's my philosophy.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's mirroring our philosophy here in Canada for sure. And I'm excited.
Yeah.
This is such crucial work, and this is much needed in today's day and age.
It is. It's really important to be focusing on well-being. And for most of the Humanistic Resources show, we're not talking strictly about what you would think workplace wellness is all about. We're talking about other topics. This is one that is more traditional in terms of, really stressing the importance of wellness. But, we know that communication is important. We know that leadership's important. All of these things factor into the bottom. It's not as simple as, hey, if you can get everybody to change how they eat, everything's going to be better. There's no magic wand that does that. It's not all hunky-dory.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, what are your final thoughts about wellness in the workplace and encouragement that you want to share out there?
Yeah, I want to share. I mean, like the research is there. I mean, we both shared a lot of stats and stories, and at least consider it. At least have a look. Open your mind to the possibility that maybe if you're not quite so open to the idea of some of these holistic modalities, that maybe your staff do. And my thought is, your employees can either be your biggest asset or your biggest expense, and that's entirely up to you and your approach to it.
Excellent words of wisdom. Patrick, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you donating your time to helping make the business case for investing in employee well-being. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. It was amazing to be here today. Yeah,
awesome.
I appreciate it.
So for everyone who watched, thank you. We appreciate you. Definitely put your comments in the field. Even if you're watching this as a recording, wherever it is you found it, we will find your comment. We will get back to you. But thank you for coming to the Humanistic Resources show today. Stay tuned. Go to our website. Take a look at our upcoming topics. We've got some great stuff lined up for you for the next couple of months. And we appreciate your support and your attentiveness to this very, very important subject about the well-being in the companies. Thanks.